Hi everyone, and thanks for joining me today for our DIY project. This is Maria from Deck the Halls DIY Studio, and for today's project, if you ordered your kit through Deck the Halls, you will have your board, which will be pre-stained or pre-painted to your preference when you registered or ordered your kit. You will have your stencils, you will have paint, and you will have sponges. So that's what will come in your kit. And then at home, what you'll need to have on hand, for sure, a tape measure, a square or something that will help you create straight lines. I would recommend a pencil. And then if you would like a paint marker to make your lines for your ruler marks, or maybe a thin brush for painting your lines on. So maybe even a marker, a Sharpie. So that part is up to you. But we'll get started and we'll talk about how we create growth charts here at Deck the Halls. So you're going to want to consider how high off the ground you're hanging your growth chart. So this is a 6-foot long board. Generally, we start our growth charts 6 inches off of the ground. So when you hang it up, you'll measure 6 inches from the ground, and that will be where the base of your growth chart is, and then you'll hang it from that height. And that is to account for your baseboards. So you might want to check your baseboards to check how thick they are so that you account for the right starting point on your growth chart. The other thing you might want to think about is how tall your family members are and how tall your kids might be. But this growth chart is going to 6 feet, 6 inches, so you might be okay. So the next thing we're going to do to get started, you have a few more options. I'm just gonna stretch out my tape measure here, and we're gonna have a little chat about how we're going to start this and what I do and what your decision-making skills can have. So I always start our growth charts here at the studio 6 inches off the ground, so I move my tape measure for simplicity. I moved it to 6 inches, and I put that at the base of my ruler, or my growth chart here, okay? Now, I like to mark every inch, but you don't have to. You could mark every foot and half a foot. You could mark every inch, a half of a foot, and the foot as different lengths, which is what I usually do. Or you could come up with some other way to mark it. But whatever way you do, that you want to keep it consistent, clearly, because you're creating a ruler, and you want to do what you would like, because this is where the do-it-yourself part really takes shape. So to get started, you'll want to mentally think about how far off the ground I'm going to hang it. For me, it's going to be 6 inches. And then you want to think about, do I want to mark every inch, or am I going to mark it differently? When you're ready, you will simply take your pencil, and I just make little marks where the inches are. Now this is 1 foot, so I'm just gonna scoot my tape measure up a little bit, and I'm gonna put a little 1, and I just circle it, because that's gonna tell me that's 1 foot, and I'm going to talk to you about why I do that after I get all my inches marked. So I'm just making these lightly. Now, here is a 1.5 feet, and I'm gonna write a half by it so that I know that that's 1.5 feet. And then I will continue on. And I do that so that my next step, this is at 2, so I'll put a 2. So my next step, I know where so I don't have to count it out. I know where those marks are, because I do make my lines different at those spots. So you'll want to continue all the way up your board until you have all your marks made. Okay, now that you have finished making all of your marks at whatever increments you preferred. I usually take a square or something that will help me create straight lines, and I go back. Let's see here, let's get this back. I go back to where I started from, and I make all my 1 inch increments. I make them all a 1/2 inch wide. I'm just gonna double check. Yes, I make them all a 1/2 inch wide. And that is because, and I actually did that already, cool. When I get to my 1 foot mark, I make that longer. I make that 1.5. I make that line 1.5 inches. Because when I get to my half, my 1.5 foot mark, or 1.5 feet, let's see here, I'm gonna make that 1 inch long. Because I like to have varying lengths of my little tick marks here on my growth charts. But this is your preference. So if you want them all to be the same, you can make them all the same. If you want them all different, make them all different. If you want to only acknowledge the foot, 1 foot, 2 foot, you could. So you'll continue doing this all the way up. And I'm still using my pencil just because I'm trying to double check that I made all of the correct lines before I paint. Because paint is pretty permanent, where pencil I can erase. Or I can find a way to sand it off and cover it up. So I'm still using a pencil to do this part. So you'll want to continue making your marks all the way up the board. Okay, so now we're back. You have made all of your marks. They're nice and straight. Now you can take your square, whatever you're using to keep your lines straight, and your paint marker or your paintbrush. And now you're going to start on this end of the board. So you're going to start at the top and you work your way down so that you don't smear paint while you're pulling your straight edge down the board. Okay, so you're going to just simply use your paintbrush, your paint marker, or maybe you're really good at freehand. And you're just going to keep moseying down, because now you're making all of your tick marks that you designated before. Okay, and for this growth chart, you'll see I'm just using black, but don't be afraid of color. You know, we could have white or pinks or blues or yellows. I've seen a wide variety of really cool growth charts. So you'll continue this all the way down to the end of your growth chart, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so we're back. So your next step, because you've done all of your lines, you're ready to go with that. Your next step is to look at your stencils. I'm gonna start with, at the top of this growth chart, they wanted love grows here. So I'm gonna start with this because that will dictate if I can fit my number 6 up here or not. Sometimes you can't, depending on what design you go with. But this is another fun thing about Deck the Halls, is we do all things custom. So this growth chart that I'm working on today chose to only do a seine up here, but you can create your growth chart to look like anything. We have seen growth charts with a large giraffe that stretches all the way up, which is super cute. We have lots of families that put their family name on. Sometimes if it's made for one child, maybe it's bright pink and it has their name on it. We've done polka dots, we've done gingham, we have done a fishing one. So you can really get creative with the designs that you put on your growth chart. But for today, the one that I'm showing you has just the seine at the top. So I'm gonna look at how I'm gonna place this stencil, and then I will apply my foot markings, so my numbers So let's talk about how to use our stencils. So you'll want to smooth them over one more time, just to prepare them. Now you're gonna flip them over to the back side, and you'll leave yours on the tabletop. Because my camera's up here, I'm going to come up so that you can see. You're going to pull the white from the blue and the clear, okay? And you're gonna go about that. I generally start in a corner and work my way, and I do pull slowly. Now, depending on your design, you might have a little piece that comes up. So if anything comes up on the blue, meaning sticks to the blue, just push it right back down. Right now, you are making a large sticker. We're gonna put this to the side because we will use that in a minute. You're making a large sticker, so don't stick it to itself and don't stick it to your board yet because it will stay and then you may tear it if it's not in the correct spot. Okay, so now you can take a look at where you were hoping to place it. So this sign, or this girl chart wanted the love grows here right at the top, okay? And so I'm just going to make sure that I am centered on my growth chart and that I'm not covering up any of the line markings. And then I do want to make sure I'm on the board. When you are happy with your placement of your stencil, I encourage you to start in the middle and fan out with applying pressure and smoothing it out. Now, sometimes people like to use, we have squeegees in the studio, so then they would go over it with that. So you could use a credit card or a gift card at home. But I find it, when we prepare the wood, we sand it really well. You don't really need those things. So you're going to peel the clear from the blue and leave the blue stencil on the table. Okay, so you're gonna do just what we did, similar to what we did with the white, except this time it's with the clear. And you're going to pull that off, and now this clear transfer tape can be thrown away, or you can keep it for another project. I'm then going to just smooth it over with my hand. Now, if you notice something not in its place where you want it, use something like your nail or an X-Acto knife or a clip or something that might have a sharp point to move. Okay, once you've placed that design and I check to make sure it's set where I want it, I've applied that stencil, I'm going to look at my numbers. I'm actually going to skip the number 6. I'm not sure if I want 6 on there yet, so I'm going to leave that blank for right now, and I'm going to start with my 5. And so you're going to do the same thing. Whoops, there's our 6. Here's our 5. You're going to do that same thing. You're going to peel from the corner. Remember, you want the white to come up clean, so you see the red or the 5 kind of stuck to it. It pushed itself back down. I like to line these up kind of centered. So I'm going to put my 5 right here. So I kind of center it on my line, and then I will just smooth it down with my hand. Okay, and then again, you want to make sure you peel up the clear and then smooth it down one more time with your hand. You will continue to repeat this process for all of your numbers. Okay, and then we'll move into painting. All right, so we're back. You've applied all your stencils. And you're ready to paint. So to paint, you'll want to get your paint colors out from your kit that were supplied, and then we're going to use the white makeup sponges. Now, less is more. So a trick that we have, when you have your paint, if you want to shake it, this kind of helps you use less paint. So if you want to shake it so it gets on the top of the container, when you take off the lid, you will have paint on it. Now, I need to grab this white paper here. Okay, so remember how I said we would use that white paper again? This is where you're gonna use it. So when we paint, less is more. So what you'll do is you'll take your paint off your lid, and I'm kind of smearing it around a little bit. so that I get paint on my entire spot here. So you'll load your sponge, unload, so you'll dab a little bit off, and then you'll just dab where you want that color. Now your coats should be extremely thin. So think about the tissue paper, the thickness of tissue paper. That is, I forgot to dab off, sorry. That is how thick your paint should be. Super thin, consistency of the tissue paper thickness. Okay, so you'll do one clean coat, let it dry, and because our coats are so thin, it will dry fairly fast. And while that one's drying, you can move on to your next number. Dab it off, dab, nice thin coat again. And then when you're done doing all of your numbers and your design, I will go up and do that design in black as well. When you're done with it, you'll look at it and you can decide if you want a second coat. If you want a second coat, I would encourage you to do it the same way you did before. The thickness of tissue paper. So very, very thin. Okay? Thin coats are better. Now remember to dab, which means kind of like a pounce, because if you paint it back and forth, you run the risk of pushing paint underneath your stencil, and paint under your stencil will bleed. Okay, so you don't want bleeding because that kind of looks like it's smeared. So I encourage you to just keep going with it. Nice thin coats, and continue until you are happy with the design. Okay, so keep painting and we'll see what we end up with. Okay, so you've painted, you have allowed your stencils to dry. Now you can peel up your stencils. So you'll grab it by a corner and you'll just pull up. Now it's kind of like pulling up a Band-Aid, but you don't need to be too aggressive with it. You can pull it up really smooth. Now I want to show you that the number 4 will have an inside piece. So in the studio we use X-Acto knives, but at home you might find tweezers or maybe an end of a safety pin, or maybe your fingernails will help you get those inside pieces out. You'll do the same with your designs, and sometimes the designs have even smaller pieces. So for example, in this sign, the E's have very small pieces, so you're gonna wanna make sure you go in very flat. Okay, don't poke at it because you'll gouge the wood. Go very, very flat to pick out the insides of the letters. And depending on what paint color you have, it's tricky to sometimes see them. But this was 2 very thin coats of paint, and as you can see, it shows up very well. So you don't need a lot of paint. The paint will go very far. Just remember to use very thin coats of paint when you're creating your project. And there you have it. You have a growth chart. Thanks for joining us today. And thanks for creating with Deck the Halls DIY Studio. We look forward to creating with you again soon.